Hello, my name is Silvester Henderson. I am the CEO of Professor for Life Incorporated, and I'm so honored I would say, midday to welcome Mr. Larry Davis, uh, who is a wonderful educator and ex-administrator, as well as an author. And so, welcome, Mr. Davis.
Well, thank you. First of all, let me say thank you for having me. This is a pleasure to be here with you and your audience. As you know, I've been a longtime fan of you, Professor, so this is more of a treat for me than it is for you. So thank you for
Well,
having me.
you continue to be kind. Can you please introduce yourself to the digital media world here, our academic world here?
All right, so I'm Larry Davis. I'm first and foremost a man of God, a blessed father too. I'm a second career educator. I've been a classroom teacher, an assistant principal, an associate principal, a high school principal, a district coordinator for special projects, which was school improvement, a regional director of schools, and a regional superintendent of schools, an executive director of secondary student learning and talent development. Published several books, and I've done professional conferences in about 17 different cities and states.
Wow, sound like you've had your share of both joy and stress.
Right. One thing you and I talk about sometimes, people don't notice because they're not privy to the conversations is sometimes as an educator, it's good for you to know what other states are doing and going through. And so when you just stuck in your little bubble and you think that's the world and you go outside that bubble and you realize, whoa, there's a whole new world in education out there and you can learn from it and bring it back. So
Please describe some of your work as an educator, especially as an author. I know you have several books that you've written, and all of your work really focuses, from what I'm understanding, on supporting students of color, as well as your passion around faith-based learning. Faith-based learning.
you know what? I like the way you place it. I initially when I first got into corporate America, excuse me, one of the one of the things I struggled with was how do you have Christian leadership and exhibit those Christian leadership qualities in a secular society, right? And so going into education, you had the same struggles. I had the same struggle. So one of the things I've written several books, but I think my first encounter in the classroom, I was a substitute teacher, and my first substitute job ever, and it was a Spanish-speaking only bilingual class. And I went into that classroom and I didn't speak Spanish, and there was only one student there who spoke Spanish. And that student check roll. That student told me when it was time for them to go to art, music, when it was time for them to go to PE, because it was a self-contained Spanish class. So now you get the picture. I don't speak Spanish, so I hadn't brought anything to these wonderful students all day. About noon, 12:30 noon, a parent came in and she read to the students the rest of the day in Spanish. Well, when it was time to go, these students got up and they were just hugging me. I'm 6'5", I'm small first graders, so they're hugging me and talking to me in Spanish. And I look over at the mom and she's in tears. And I was like, what's going on? And she goes, Mr. Davis, they're telling you they love you. Please come back. They had such a good time. I went home and I thought, and I sat in front of these incredible students for 7 hours and brought zero to them. And then I realized that if I ever became a teacher, I was going to put my son and my daughter's face on each kid who walked through my classroom, not the color of their skin, but their face. So make sure to get the education they deserve. Now, we don't see that kind of commitment in our education system. If we did, we wouldn't have this big achievement gap between Blacks and whites, Hispanics and Asians. So I wish more educators would do that. So I've written books about understanding the kid. A kid is a kid is a kid. A brain is a brain is a brain. We need to stop trying to segregate kids by the color of their skins and say, oh, Black kids learn this way, white kids learn this way. You know what? No. All children will learn if they feel loved, if they're connected to the learning, their parents are involved in the schools. I mean, we know the factors that really count, right? Now, does that mean that students don't have different learning styles? No, because they do. But we can teach every child if we just make a genuine commitment to building a relationship with them. So one of my books is working with our 4D students, right? Defiant, difficult, disrespectful, disruptive. Now, that's the politically way to say that. But normally when you look at the discrepancy in discipline, those students who I just labeled disruptive, disrespectful, defiant, right? Those students are traditionally students of color. And we know nationally, African-American females are the most disproportionately disciplined person on the campus, and then African-American males, followed by Hispanic females, and then students with disability. So my whole point is, it's our beliefs, it's our relationships, it's the adult's attitude, it's the culture and climate that we build, and the environment and engagement that we create that helps students learn, not the color of their skin.
Wow. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you found, can you kind of give us an overview of some of the districts that you've been employed in? I know you worked in some of the California schools, and I believe the majority of your work has been in the South and the Texas school system. Can you kind of tell us, the districts that you've worked in, and describe the requirements for becoming a K-12 educator in the Texas educational system?
We have that certification path just like most states. Texas has what we call the Texas Education Agency, where most states will have the Department of Education. That is our Department of Education, the Texas Education Agency. So we have alternative certification programs. We have the traditional path through college. But what I think we've experienced most lately, probably in the last 15 years, is the requirement for the training prior to going into the classroom has been lax. So we're bringing more and more teachers into the classroom who aren't prepared to meet the needs of a diverse student body. They're going into classrooms with all this theory and no practice. And to me, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't think a semester of student teaching is enough. I think a teacher should have a mentor and a shadow teacher for at least the first year, just to help them through it. And that teacher should be there and help them out. And that teacher should have the flexibility of having someone cover their class. It should be just a total different teacher who's not even connected to a classroom, so they can spend time with that student. And I wrote one of my districts, I wrote a teacher induction program because we saw such a high turnover of teachers. And here's funny, in 2020, right before COVID, I was speaking at the Texas Association of Black School Educators Conference, and I put a slide up, and there were several school board members, campus leaders, and district leaders in the breakout. And I put a slide up that says, in the coming years, you'll see more online teachers than face-to-face teachers coming into the business. And they disrupted. We don't agree with that. We don't agree with that. That Monday, that March 3rd, we shut schools down. And ever since then, we've seen an influx of what? Virtual learning. And you've seen more classroom teachers in the building go to virtual teaching. You've seen more virtual schools opening up. You've seen more districts adopting the virtual learning style. So I'm not saying I was, clairvoyant, but I put that out there, and I remember
you're prophetic.
Yeah, I put that out there, and I remember having those people. And then one of them actually, one of the school board members actually called and said, "Can I get that slide from you? I want to put it in my dissertation." I'm like, "Oh, sure." And so there you go. So, but here in the South, I will say this about teaching in the South, especially versus California. So you guys have California, shouldn't say you guys. California has very strong teacher unions, and I mean strong. Texas has teacher associations. If I document a teacher, I can non-renew that teacher at the end of the year in Texas. It takes an act of Congress to non-renew a teacher in California. So
absolutely.
I don't know if you remember the documentary. It was two of them. One was called The Cartel, and one was called Waiting for Superman.
Yes.
You remember that? And so in one of them, I can't remember which one, it says that the state of California has this thing called the Lemon Dance. And it's at the end of the year when all the public schools switch the worst teachers from one campus to another and pick from the best lemons, right? Texas doesn't do that. If once they non-renew, now you can go. We have more school districts than the rest of the entire United States altogether. But if we non-renew you, you can. We don't hold your certification. Now we just non-renew you for that position at that campus and in that district, so you can go to another district and apply for a job, and it's up to them to hire you. But we don't fight you not keeping your job. Now we have teacher associations who will go to bat for you, but they're not as powerful as those unions in California.
Yeah, California has very, very strong teachers unions. I have mixed feelings about that because I think I've only taught in California.
Right.
I've lectured outside of California, but I have primarily been a professor in the California context. Totally. And I've worked in all the different levels of education in higher education as faculty, leader, Senate president, tons of the committee, district Senate president, state appointment, and I worked as an administrator. And I have mixed feelings. I think that there is an assumption across the country that as you move up into particular positions, you become more ethical or you have more integrity. And
Yes.
That is really not the truth. Sometimes you can have great teachers with great integrity, and sometimes you can have lousy administrators with horrible integrity. Sometimes you can have lazy teachers and a great administrator.
Correct.
So I think one of the challenges is that people think titles mean integrity, and titles do not. And so from that standpoint, I'm not sure how to balance it, because many of the administrators, especially in the California community college system, are always complaining about the fact that they really have no power over authority over what they consider to be a bad educator. But on the same token, the the faculty has no power of authority over the administrator, who may be equally as incompetent as the faculty member. So I would like to ask you, how would you deal with something like that, or how have you dealt with something like that in a red state? Because I know in Texas, especially with all the political things happening now, they have, especially around equity and equality. If I'm saying it right, I believe the red states believe in equality, but not equity. And there's there's a difference. They believe in equality from the standpoint that they believe that everybody should be given equal access, but equity gives you another step above. That means that if you're short and you need to be able to look over the fence, we will give you a ladder or a chair to be able to look over the fence. And so sometimes I grapple with that concept, but I do agree that there are ineffective educators and ineffective administrators. But I'm not really sure how to address those issues. And that's a big
and ineffective district leaders. Let's not stop
Absolutely.
there. Stop on the campus, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah. So let me put it this way. So when I was in Fresno Unified School District, by the way, and I had resigned because my mom had her cancer had come back, so I was coming back to Texas, and the campus principal was about to take a job at Clovis City College.
Okay.
And so he goes, when I gave him my resignation letter, he goes, Larry, I was putting your name in for principal of this school. And I said, I've been in too many department chair meetings, and I've done too many classroom walkthroughs. I'm from Texas. Half of these teachers would be gone. And I said, so I would be in front of the union every week, because there's no way I can allow this kind of ineptitude to be in front of these students every day. So I witnessed a young man. It's true meeting. I witnessed the department chair talking to one of the teachers about thesis statements, and the gentleman said, "I'm in the middle of polo season. Texas doesn't have water polo. You guys do. So I'm in the middle of water polo season, so I don't have time to teach thesis statements." And she goes, "No, you get a stipend for coaching. You get a salary for teaching." He didn't say anything else the rest of that meeting. The next day, I get an email that he was going to be out for 3 days on a 3 days mental health day that the union gave him because they felt like he was berated in the meeting. So that's the power of a teacher union. Now, you're exactly right. Equity and equality are not the same, not even close. And the way I define it is, equality is, everybody gets the same thing. It's just in the word equal. But equity is everybody gets what they need to be successful.
That's right.
And if that means Dr. Henderson gets $10,000 extra added to his student thing so he can get this service and this service, then Larry, then that's what we need. The thing about Texas is Texas does not like that. Texas wants all the money to go to the affluent and the more, the more successful schools, right? In fact, if I'm not mistaken, we just had a district athletic director resign because he took the Title IX money and phoned it over to boys sports. So, and how big football is in the state of Texas.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's the kind of things that we deal with in Texas. And we had a superintendent several years ago who funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars in Title I money over to the AP program in his more affluent side of town. So that's, like, by definition, that's the opposite of equity. And we know that's a federal crime. So both of those people resign and things like that. So this is what you see happen more and more in Texas, because the affluent has a voice and they're going to speak loudly, and the less affluent are usually not a part of the school board. Now, share this last one with you. In Texas, if I want to run for school board, but I live in a really nice neighborhood and we already have a representative there, I can go and put a rental property in another precinct, and now I can run for that precinct because I have a rental property there. It doesn't have to be my main address. And so now you have two people from the same affluent district precinct on the school board, and you have nobody representing that impoverished district. So there is no equity or equality in education at sometimes.
See, my concern, thank you, Mr. Davis, for clarifying that. If I had any assessment about California community college and K through 12, California does a lot of talking, meaning that if you look at our mission statements in most of our institutions, they look wonderful. But the reality is that very few people really spend the time to activate the statements and to make the statements become a living organism in the institution. California has such an enormous pay for their educators now that one of the major concerns is, how much more money can I make to become an educator? I don't have any problem with an educator being successful, because I was very successful and I was compensated very well. I think that's wonderful. The challenge is, I'm not sure that California really has a mechanism for actualizing their writings and their missions as opposed to looking good on paper. And that is my real concern about the ingredients of the California educational system. A lot in the community college. California it's very litigious. there are so many rules and assessments requirement and core update requirements. But the reality is that I believe that teaching is very much like effective parenting, and
Yes.
that if you really want to become a great teacher, you find a way, and it's not necessarily found in a curricular instructional guide. These are just things that are written. I mean, we have to have things that we measure work by, but you have to have something to measure work by. But the reality is that you should do whatever it takes in order for the student to be successful. So it's really interesting to hear how in Texas, teachers don't have as much positional support at a school, meaning that at the end of that year, if they are not really doing well, they can be their contract can simply not be renewed.
Right. We do.
We're in California. So there's no such thing as there obviously is no such thing. Or clarify me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's no such thing as real tenure in Texas.
Well, you know what? I have, if you look at my certification, it'll show I had tenure in one district. They don't really kind of call it that anymore. But once you've been there so many years, the likelihood of them just letting you go is rare. But so if I evaluate, Professor Henderson, and I give you below expectation rating, and that's called a teacher in need of assistance, Tina. And so you have a right to go.
I like that, Tina.
Right, as opposed to Karen, right? But
okay.
So then at that point in time, you can say, I want a second evaluation, right? And you can now, it doesn't matter how good or how bad your evaluation is. You can request a second evaluation without, you don't have to give a reason. You're just like, I just want a second evaluation. At that time, a person who's not connected to the school, a person from the district will come over and evaluate you, right? And so if you've been there 3 years, if you're no longer on probation, you don't have to, won't necessarily terminate you. They will give you, put you on a growth plan for the following year, right? So growth plans in California are almost like a bad word. You're not gonna put me on a growth plan, because that's like saying something bad. So the union comes in and said, no, we're not gonna do a growth plan. We're gonna do this. But in Texas, we'll do a growth plan. Now, here's the thing. Everyone I talk to who's not in education, the first thing they always tell me is, Larry, the problem with education is it's too political. We need to get the politics out of it. Well, we can't. I mean, it's just impossible, because first of all, who hires a superintendent? The school board in Texas. And I know there are some states where the superintendent actually run for the office. I think Florida is one of those states. But if the school board is hiring a superintendent and the school board is elected by vote, that is a political process in its own, right? Because now we're going to hire a superintendent who fulfills the needs that we want to see. And everybody on the school board is running for school board for a specific agenda. They have their own agenda. So you're going to hire the superintendent that can help meet your agenda. So that's political in itself. The other side is, when you talk about teacher support, the campus principal is the one who evaluate, and the assistant principal evaluate the teacher, not HR, not central office. So when you send something up to them that says, I want to non-renew this teacher, HR doesn't have the staff to come in and go, let me investigate all this thing. All they're going to say is, send me your documentation. And then you're going to meet with the teacher and you're going to say, we're going to recommend to the board that you be non-renewed. Because now it's, again, when you talked about ethics earlier. Now we're relying on the ethics of that administrator telling the truth about that teacher to get them non-renewed. And so that's always going to be an issue here in Texas, because we don't know if it's personal or if it's professional, but the school board who non-renews a teacher never sees a teacher teach. The superintendent who suggests a non-renewal to the school board never witnesses teacher teach. HR department who recommends a non-renewal to the superintendent was not a part of this evaluation process, only the school. And so what you have is one person from the school saying, we want to non-renew this teacher, and here's my documentation. And so it's me versus you, but 9 times out of 10, the district's going to support the principal.
Wow. Well, those are the complexities in education in general. Yeah. Can you tell us about, describe some of your research or some of your findings as it relates to strategies for improving learning for students of color? I know you talked a lot about really caring.
So I have this theory, and it's really not a theory. It's actually really simplistic. You talked about we have to have a curriculum to measure things earlier. You said that just a few moments ago. The problem with everything that we offer, from an initiative to leadership to curriculum to academics instructions, we have a word called compliance and we have a word called compliant. We often check the boxes to stay in compliance, but if we did a deeper dive, we would see that we're not being compliant to the full letter of that initiative, to the full letter of that policy or that procedure. And this is where teachers and students of color start to fall behind. They're the victim of the compliant, not the compliance. And so when you go before the school board and a parent takes it to the school board looks at the documentation and go, well, we did this, we did this, we did this. We're in compliance. But did you do it to the letter of the law that was going to best benefit this kid, which is often no. So you're not compliant, but you're in compliance. So we walk that tightrope, that thin line between compliance and compliant all the time in education. And our children of color are typically the ones who suffer. I was writing a paper and I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said he's a great superintendent, right? And I know what he meant, but when he said it, it didn't sound right. He said the achievement gap in America is filled with dark brown and light brown children. And I said, listen, man, never say that again. He goes, but Larry, that's why the achievement gap is there, because it's filled with light brown. And I said, no. If the achievement gap was filled with light brown and dark brown children, we wouldn't have an achievement gap. It would be filled. I said, the problem is the light brown and dark brown children are on the edge of the other side of the gap. They're not in the gap. They're sitting on the ledge on the other side. And so when I go and talk to teachers and everything, the first thing is build a relationship with kids, right? And I think you'll see that even in the college level, right? And my daughter graduated last Saturday. She graduated on the 11th, and she's headed to medical school. And one thing she said when she first got to middle school, she goes, Daddy, I take my teachers cookies, even if I'm gonna hire that teacher next year. I said, why? She said, Daddy, I need to know them. They need to know me so they can understand how I learn and how I am. I don't want them making a decision and not know me. And I thought, you little teacher's pet, right? No. And she did that in college. If she was going to have a professor next semester, she went by there this semester and started speaking to the professor, right? That's a genuine, authentic relationship. And that's something adults don't choose to do with children, and our children shouldn't have to choose to do it with the adult first.
That's absolutely right. What you're saying to me is basically something that the world is lacking. And that's just common sense. The common sense of relationships as it relates to the teaching of students. Tell me, if you could share with us, Mr. Davis, what do you think are your most significant writing accomplishments and why?
You know what? I would think two of the things I think are most significant, they're not published as far as you can purchase them. One was a teacher induction program that I wrote for a district, and then a teacher induction grant to help school districts get a grant to help first year, second year teachers, just new teachers new to the district. That's probably been the most impactful. Now, I wrote a book in 2017, and I think this is one I sent you a long time ago. I have no idea if Professor Henderson ever read it. It was The Re-Education of the African American Child in Today's School System. You call and let me know
I
you
think
have.
I read it. I think I read bits and pieces of. You know what? I have to be honest. I get so much stuff. I get books.
Right?
I get writings. I get songs. I get
Yeah.
materials. My my inbox and my mail is enormous. Sometimes what I do, to be honest, I get overwhelmed and I just turn it off.
And, when you told me that you had received it and you was reading, I felt like you were being pleasant, but it's okay. So, when I wrote that book, I reached out to over 500. Now, this is a collective of 500. I want you to understand this. So, a collection of 500, including parents, teachers, administrators, business people in the community, church members, and students, right?
Okay.
Now, based on whatever group you were in, I asked you two questions, and I asked the first question was, as a student, what do you feel that we could do better? And these are African American students. What do you feel the education system could do better for you? As a student, what could you do better to help your education? And I did it across the line with, parents, with teachers, with administrators, and so on and so on. Now, I got about 250 of those back. To me, I thought that was a really good response. And so the book is filled with things that these are not pointing the fingers at people. It's about what these groups of people has identified as things they see wrong and things that they know they can improve in themselves, right? The problem is, if I'm a great teacher and I go to work for you, Professor Henderson, and I notice that you let the teachers to the left, to the right, and across the hall get away with doing almost nothing. By December, I'm less and less active, right? I'm starting to take on the identity of the campus. Lethargic, lazy, not really doing it, going the extra mile. But if you surround me with teachers who are just pushing the envelope to the next level, I'm going to start pushing the envelope to the next level because I want
That's
to, so what we find is, so when I wrote the book, The Re-Education of the African American Child in Today's School System, the first thing I said, I think like in the first couple of pages, I talk about if you ask a group of educators. Now, there is a story about me being in a school district, and I don't want to say what state, and they were talking about putting together a committee to find out how they could connect more. It was California, but how they could connect more Blacks to the help students achieve at a higher level. And the issue was there were no Blacks on the committee.
That's right.
So first of all, now you have no identity to what's going on with the Black community. I think like some of the people say you don't have any skin in the game, right? So I'm not questioning the intelligence of the people on the committee, but I am questioning the empathy of the people on the committee. If they don't know what you're going through, what you're experiencing, how can they tell you why you're not being successful?
Well, Mr. Davis, you are very, very kind. I would really question the integrity because that's a huge issue. I've almost many times been thrown out of meetings because I complain about that all the time. I bring that to the forefront of all discussions. It's just that, it's crazy. You have all these committees. It's kind of like the idea that in the California community college system, there was this idea that we can't find faculty of color because they don't have the right credentials. So one time my district, the Contra Costa Community College District, this was maybe 6-7 years ago, during the holiday time, I wanted to show that they were not being honest. So you know what I did? Because everybody know I have this mega network.
Sure.
So during the vacation time, when most people were enjoying their families and doing whatever, I was enjoying mine. But I took the time. I created like a job description for jobs that were already on the district employment website. And I sent it out and I told people, for more information, give me a call. I met thousands, at least about 2,000 people that I sent, and I encouraged them to apply for the Contra Costa Community College District. And they were all people of color with masters and PhDs. And then I went back to something we had, District Governance Council, and they acknowledged, like, wow, where did he meet all these people? It was simple. The people are out there. I tell people all the time, if you want to be more integral in your hiring practices, it's simple. Quit hiring so many white folk. Just that simple. You don't have to have laws to tell you that common sense is common sense. Everybody's going to try to say, oh, we have to follow the law and we're not being discriminatory. Well, the reality is that you are being discriminatory.
You are. The fact that you say, I'm going to interview X amount of blacks, you've already said, I'm going to interview them, but I'm not going to hire them. You know, you mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion earlier, and I want to say this is something really interesting. I read an article. First, before you say that, the problem here in Texas, diversity, equity, and inclusion should not be a part of the HR department. It's not HR. But I read an article that said, if a company truly has diversity, equity, and inclusion, they wouldn't have a diversity, equity, and inclusion office. Right?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so let me apologize. If I said I don't question their integrity, I meant to say I don't question their intelligence.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. No. The ethics behind that is all messed up. But I don't question their intelligence. You can be an intelligent person, but you can identify with something you've never done.
That's right.
And so it's really amazing. And I have people argue with me all the time. Matter of fact, when I wrote and I stand in correction with this one, a friend of mine, he's a Hispanic superintendent. When I wrote the re-education of the African-American child in today's school system in 2017, he read it and said, Larry, had you made this minority students, it would be a bestseller because Hispanics would have flocked to it. And I said, you're probably right. And I stand corrected. I said, however, what I identified as an issue was the gap between blacks and the other students. And so that's why I wrote it. I wrote it from a personal perspective, but he's exactly right, And so, I mean, I agree with you. The opportunities for us, for African-American children, I actually just did a proposal for a district in California because I know California they started an initiative in 2023 to try to hire more African-American teachers. I think right now the state of California is less than 3%.
Yep.
African-American teachers.
Yep.
And so I looked at it. So the state of California is only 5.7, depending on whichever measurement you look at. One says 5.7, one says 6.4% black. So that means your faculty and staff should identify to the same percentage as your student body. If you have 4% black, you should have 4% blacks on your faculty and staff. I'm not saying stop there at 4%, but I'm just saying if your faculty and staff doesn't look like your student body, there's no role modeling taking place there.
Having said that, how does the political climate support students of color or not, you think, in the red versus blue states?
You know what? I think in the red states, and I'm just saying, here in Texas for sure, and I'm gonna go in the South because in the South, the story that you get has already been, the narrative has already been changed. So you don't know what it is. When it reaches the news, when it reaches the paper, when it reaches the media, if it involves a black student, the narrative has already been reorganized and changed to fit the district's need. Here's a great example. There's a school district here called Barbers Hill. It's a small district, but very, very affluent, right? And so in Texas, we signed something called the Crown Act this year, which means you cannot suspend a kid because of his hair design. If it's the way he wears his hair or she wears her hair is cultural, you can't discriminate against that kid. Well, this district put this kid in ISS, in-school suspension, alternative school suspension, all year because he had braids, but he had pinned the braids up. And they said, well, if he let them down, it would be above his below his ear. And the attorney said, but his hair is never down. And guess what? The commissioner here, who was appointed by a governor who's Republican, they ruled in favor of the school district, even though they put that policy into act. Even though, so when something finally makes it to a hearing or independent hearing officer, the narrative has been changed and reconstructed in such that it's rare that the minority child is going to be heard and served justly.
Wow. Mr. Davis, we got about 3 minutes because I always try to keep our interviews around an hour or 50 minutes to an hour. I am so honored to have had you to come on our podcast and discuss your perspectives and to share your wonderful experiences. Can you share any final thoughts or ideas you would like to communicate with our media world?
Now, what I'm going to say this, and I'm going to look. 1982, we had a nation at risk, and that was for the first time in the history of this country. Children were graduating high school with less knowledge than their parents. At that time, there was no assessment, so how would they know that? Then we had No Child Left Behind. It was the most signed bipartisan legislation in the history of the United States, but we still left children behind, children of color. The next we had a race to the top. Well, who was racing? Because we were so far behind, why would we even start? The starting line for us was not the starting line for everybody else. And then now we have Every Student Succeeds Act. All these things sound great. They're great acronyms. They sound great when they roll off your tongue. But the one thing they're not great for is our students, because each of these things depends on what we call standardized learning, standardized tests, standardized teaching. We don't have standardized children. They don't come from standardized backgrounds. They don't have standardized needs, and they don't have standardized goals. So we have this teaching that has been created since 1865 that was built and created to teach affluent whites, not minority students. So until we decide to throw that system out, revamp it, and take our children in consideration, put our children at the heart of what we're doing, we're going to always have this achievement gap in this country.
Standardized curriculum, standardized learning is different than personalized learning, and effective,
right?
And effective learning for our students. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule with all the things that you have to do with your family and your business and being an author and a national speaker. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on our podcast. I wish you nothing but much blessings. I don't know when I will visit Texas, but one of these days I have to come and speak at one of the conferences in Texas and share what a wonderful educator and professional you are. Thank you kindly, sir, for your kindness, and we hope to hear from you soon. And you and your family have a blessed week. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right then.